In the 5th year of our marriage, I met my husband as he had been at 18. He was sitting on the living room sofa, looking me up and down with a deep frown. "Why would I marry you 10 years from now?" I asked him what exactly he wanted. The man who still carried all the sharpness and recklessness of youth answered as if it were the most natural thing in the world: "A divorce, as soon as possible." He paused, then added with a frown, "I can't bear the thought of my future self marrying a woman he doesn't even love." I nodded and agreed. Then I began, quietly and without drawing attention, to distance myself from Julian Hayes, until one day I left the studio early and came home in advance. Just as I reached the door, I heard violent sounds of fighting from inside. "You're spreading lies about me? You little bastard! Do you really think 33-year-old me can't see through what 18-year-old me is plotting?" A younger voice roared back in fury. "You're already old. What gives you the right to hog such a good life? I hate the 10 years later version of myself. Go die." Me? Question mark? The moment I saw Julian, I knew something was wrong. He was too young. He didn't have the effortless composure of the 33-year-old Julian, nor that unreadable depth that came with age. He lounged on the sofa like some freshly adulted boy who feared nothing and no one. There was still a trace of youthfulness on his face that hadn't fully faded yet. It softened what should have been harsh, sharp features, making him seem less dangerous than he ought to. The very first thing he said completely stunned me. "Who are you?" I answered, "Mia Bennett." He was wearing a loose hoodie and a pair of expensive sneakers. That unruly, defiant air about him didn't look fake, which meant two things. Either my husband of 5 years had somehow become young again, or he had an identical twin brother I had never known about. After thinking it over, I simply raised a hand and pointed at the giant wedding photo on the wall. "As you can see, I'm married to you." Julian exploded on the spot. He shot to his feet, and the oppressive force that belonged to the powerful man he would become was already faintly visible. "Married? To you?" His tone was disdainful, his expression was shocked, and the dislike on his face was painfully obvious. I quietly withdrew my gaze and said evenly, "Now it's my turn to ask questions." Perhaps because I was so calm, Julian visibly froze for a second. His gaze lingered on my face a little too long. Then, a bit unnaturally, he touched his nose and looked away. "Cuff. Ask." 3 minutes later, I'd figured it out. The person in front of me really was 18-year-old Julian Hayes. No wonder he was so arrogant. I couldn't help staring at this younger version of Julian for quite a while. To be honest, the whole thing felt bizarrely fascinating. Julian rarely ever talked to me about his past. Everything I knew about him came almost entirely from our married life. Maybe my stare was too direct, too undisguised, because the young Julian sitting on the sofa actually started to look uncomfortable. He drew back his long legs a little, as if trying to distract himself with the rock music coming from the speakers in the living room. He tried a few times, then finally snapped. I said, "Can you stop staring at me like that?" I looked down at him from above. A flush was slowly creeping across his pale skin. Even the tips of his ears had turned red. As he wished, I turned away expressionlessly and went to the fridge to get some fruit. Although I was shocked, I was handling it fairly well. Still, I couldn't help imagining what it would be like if both Julians ever really stood face to face. I was still lost in that thought when the boy on the sofa suddenly spoke. "So why would I marry you 10 years from now?" I choked on the question. His gaze was blunt, openly appraising. Before I could answer, he continued, "Knowing myself, future me wouldn't like your type." Instinctively, I shot back, "What's wrong with my type?" The speech he had so confidently prepared suddenly died in his throat. His lips parted, then closed again. I watched as his whole face slowly reddened and his eyes started darting away. In the end, unable to squeeze out a complete sentence, he just gave up and blurted out, "Anyway, you're too flashy." Flashy? Me? I'd already braced myself for young Julian to call me old or to say I wasn't pretty. Instead, he called me flashy. Maybe once upon a time I really had lived brightly and boldly, relying on my looks. But since I married Julian, I had become the model wife praised by everyone in upper-class social circles. The word flashy no longer fit me. My expression darkened immediately, and whatever patience I had vanished. So what exactly do you want? This younger Julian apparently had terrible eyesight. He couldn't read the room at all. After hearing my question, he actually slapped the table and stood up, sounding oddly excited and eager. A divorce, obviously. And then, just to make sure I understood, he added, "The sooner the better. I can't bear the idea of my future self marrying a woman he doesn't even love." I pretended to agree. Most importantly, I had to stabilize this 18-year-old Julian first. I arranged for him to stay in a small villa with a garden that was under my name. After stuffing a spare phone into his hand, I gave him a serious warning. If anything happens, contact me anytime, but do not appear in front of Julian. Young Julian's face instantly showed blatant disdain. You care about him that much? Me. Oh. This wasn't a matter of whether I cared or not. The point was that if two identical people really appeared in the same reality at the same time, anyone would find it absurd. Besides, Julian was currently tied up with a very important cross-border merger deal. I didn't want to interfere with his work, and I definitely didn't want him distracted by a suddenly appearing younger version of himself. Luckily, little Julian agreed in the end. But he had one condition. I stared at him in disbelief. "You want to hug me?" Julian sounded perfectly matter-of-fact. "What's wrong with hugging you once? You hug him often enough, don't you?" For a second, I couldn't even process that. I truly could not keep up with the logic of an 18-year-old boy. But little Julian gave me no time to think. He simply reached out and yanked me into his arms. The hand circling my waist was burning hot. I squirmed a little, feeling awkward. He only held me tighter. Then, as if taking a deep breath, he murmured slowly into my ear, "He's already 33. Does he smell old? Don't I smell better?" He? Oh, Big Julian. I fell silent for a moment. He's 33, not 53. Before I left, Julian frowned and solemnly repeated, "Remember, hurry up and divorce him." I nodded perfunctorily while thinking to myself, "Aren't you him?" By the time I hurried home, Julian had just finished showering. Yes, I should probably call him Big Julian from now on. A towel was wrapped around his waist as he leaned against the bedroom doorframe, tilting his head and smiling at me. "Busy today?" I nodded without giving anything away and lied casually. The studio landed a big order. It's been a little hectic. That brief exchange ended, and with perfect, unspoken understanding, neither of us said anything further. Julian lowered his eyes to look at me, and I had no idea what he was thinking. He didn't say, and I didn't ask. That had almost become the norm over our 5 years of marriage. People always said that after around 3 years of marriage, couples entered the so-called burnout phase. Love slowly turned into family affection, and conversation sharply decreased. But Julian and I had been like this from the very beginning. Put nicely, we treated each other with courtesy and respect. Put bluntly, we were high-end roommates. Our daily interactions were basically limited to exchanging a few token words of concern, then going off to handle our own lives. When I came out of the bathroom, I found Julian sitting there in a daze. I raised an eyebrow, surprised. He had always been the kind of person who managed time to ruthless perfection, the sort who used every minute for maximum value. I never would have guessed he was capable of zoning out. I pulled back the covers and got into bed by myself. Julian turned off the lights naturally, but my thoughts were a mess. For a moment, I was thinking about 18-year-old Julian. The next moment, I had a headache over the word divorce. Was I really going to divorce him? I met Julian 5 years ago. At the time, I had been out of college for only 1 year. With startup money from my family, I founded my own jewelry design studio. To expand my client base, I began attending every gala, charity banquet, and cocktail event I could. At one such dinner, Julian approached me first and said the necklace I was wearing was beautiful. Back then, Julian didn't exactly have the most respectable reputation in elite circles. There were endless scandals around him, endless women by his side, and a man like that would naturally be a prime customer for jewelry and gifts. So, with the mindset of making a huge profit off him, I added him. But strangely enough, for an entire 6 months, Julian never bought a single piece of jewelry from me. I was so annoyed that I felt every meal I'd had with him had gone to waste, so I stopped contacting him first, and in my heart, I slapped a label on him: cheapskate. Later, we lost contact for about 3 months, and during that period, my studio ran into funding problems. But my pride wouldn't allow me to go home and ask my family for money, so I searched everywhere for investors, capital, partners, channels, anything. At one business dinner, I ran into Julian again. I pretended not to know him and dealt with him politely and formally. Julian played along with my act and never exposed me once. After the event ended, I squatted by the roadside alone, letting the wind clear the alcohol from my head. Julian's car pulled up in front of me. He got out and crouched down beside me. His tone was gentle enough to be almost surprising. "Mia, I've been wanting to ask you, why exactly did you block me?" I ignored him. Even being snubbed like that, Julian didn't get angry. "All right, I'll just assume it was my fault. So then, may I have the honor of driving you home?" I